So time keeps marching on and the economy keeps doing what it does, ebbing and flowing as people trade goods and services with each other. And 2020 has been quite the year for the ebbing and flowing, as the economy and stock market in particular were at all-time highs. At which point they then experienced dramatic drops that ultimately led to both the stock market being at decade-long lows, as well as the economy and thus employment and GDP hitting near depression-era levels, in the US anyway. Well, with the job numbers that popped up on last Friday, June 5th, 2.2 million added, and the unemployment numbers falling to 13%, as well as the stock market also recovering, both the Standard & Poor's and Dow Jones Industrial average, that is, it would seem to indicate that the economy is at least leveling off and the slide into Hades has been arrested somewhat. Now, GDP numbers might show something a little different, but that is the premise. One thing that has sort of been under the radar, however, is the US dollar's loss of value over the last couple of months and how it's affecting the stock market in general. So we're going to go over that in this episode of BTP Fusion. So strap in, pound that like button, and hit that subscribe and notification bell so you're aware of when we drop more great content. Oh, what's up, you guys? You're watching BTP Fusion, and I'm your host, Derek West, lead software engineer, online business enthusiast, former intramural basketball scrub, and all-around good guy. On BTP Fusion, it's our mission to inspire you to take imperfect action on your business and finances using the power of technology. And you know, during this time of a pandemic, civil unrest, and so much more, taking the right action is becoming harder and harder to do. For example, one day you hear the stock market is headed for another crash, and then it has a record day. And then the next day, you hear that unemployment is going to hit 20% and eclipse Great Depression era numbers. And then 2.2 million jobs are added to the economy. It would seem as though the economy in general is in a period of great movement and upheaval. Obviously, the quarantines and lockdowns have had a great impact on the ability of business owners and employees alike to make a living the old-fashioned way, by opening up a business and trading goods and services in exchange for good solid currency. So that was the reason for the individual stimulus plans enacted by Congress, such as the Paycheck Payment Protection Act, and other stimulus bills and laws, both in law and in government agencies such as the Federal Reserve and their cutting of interest rates. In fact, one could say, and you'd be accurate, that this is the most stimulus injected into the American economy ever. Back during the time of the passages of these acts, I had a video, like and subscribe, that argued that there could in fact be a great deal of inflation from this injection of cash. Now, a lot of people feel this way, and so do I. That's why gold and Bitcoin and other safe haven investments are quite popular at the moment. That said, I also examined the other side. You see, some economists feel that since the jobs and employment would have dried up since the lockdowns started, meaning that money that would have circulated went away, then the injection of stimulus represented preventing deflation rather than injecting inflation into the economy. Now, these terms inflation and deflation can be a little bit confusing, and I did a whole video on this topic, so I don't want to take too long on it here. But for those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll give you a quick primer on the topic. Now, inflation and deflation has to deal with the money supply, and it is thought that if the amount of goods and services being traded in any market facilitated by currency, in this particular case, the US dollar, if those goods and services stays the same, and the amount of currency used for that trade increases, you have inflation. On the opposite end, if the amount of goods and services in any market stays the same, and the amount of currency being used to facilitate that trade of goods and services decreases, you have deflation. Both inflation and deflation have negative economic consequences on the economies that they afflict. Central banks have been created mostly as a state-owned wholesaler of money that are designed to keep economies going by controlling the money supply. They either increase the amount of money circulating in the economy when it goes south, or they decrease it when the economy, quote-unquote, heats up. They have various tools to do this, namely interest rates on various loans that they give out, and also deposit rates on depositing cash in their vaults. And quick question, did you know that banks deposit their money as well? Yeah, they deposit them in the central bank branches. For the US, I'm talking about the Federal Reserve Bank branches. And just like your local bank, the Federal Reserve pays an interest rate to the banks for housing their cash. Now, I don't think a normal average Joe can put his money into a central bank. You might try and see if you could start up your own bank doing that though. Now, during this pandemic, along with direct stimulus passed out to the general population, central banks have cut interest rates, and the Federal Reserve in particular cut the deposit rate to its lowest level ever. So, in mine and a lot of people's minds, that injection of cash into the economy represented a ton of stimulus that could, in theory, if not checked, cause massive inflation. Inflation that could only be solved by raising interest rates to unheard of levels and thus causing another recession. And an FYI, for those of you living in a country with high inflation, have your central banker raise interest rates. Now, it will cause a recession, but it also will clean up the money supply and lower inflation to manageable levels. But in addition to that high inflation, the economy was and still is in the toilet. Unemployment rates were at approximately 14% very recently. And as of last Friday, they dropped down to just over 13%, I believe 13.3%, which is still extremely high from where we were at the beginning of the year, where we were in like the 4% range for about 2 years straight. Now, unfortunately, I feel that unemployment will remain relatively high as long as people are cashing their stimulus checks, as the checks they are receiving are likely more than what they would get when they're working, thus giving them no incentive to go back to work. But even with that, the fact that they are now receiving more money than they normally would, which would typically be a good thing, may actually contribute to the slow decline of the dollar. And that's because they're injecting more cash than they typically would be into the economy. That's more money chasing the same amount of goods, which leads us to an interesting article from MarketWatch. Link in the description. That article describes how the US dollar and its slow decline since the start of the pandemic is a major factor in the reason why the stock market has recovered quite a bit since the start of the pandemic. The article talks about the ICE US Dollar Index. What the heck is that? Well, ICE stands for Intercontinental Exchange, a company founded in 1997 that was supposedly providing transparent pricing for electric power companies. The purpose of the company was to provide a transparent market where prices would be highly accessible to anyone in any location. And one of the products that it offers is the ICE Dollar Index. This index represents a basket of currencies compared to the US dollar. That basket of currencies include other first world currencies, including the euro, the Japanese yen, the British pound, the Canadian dollar, the Swedish krona, and the Swiss franc. To pull information right off their site, the ICE US Dollar Index, or USDX, is a geometrically averaged calculation of 6 currencies weighted against the US dollar and is calculated in real time every 15 seconds using the spot prices of the index's component currencies. The prices used for the calculation of the index is the midpoint between the best bid and offer in the component currency. That's actually a ton of information to essentially describe an index that you can purchase a futures contract on, betting that it either rises or falls at the maturation point of the contract. You know, in any case, this video is starting to get a little bit long-winded, but the ICE US Dollar Index rose 3% on the 5th of June to 96.7 points. That stated, it remained on track for a 1.4% decline for the week. Now, a little bit of context on where this index has been over the last couple of months. The index had been trading at a more than 3-year high, near 103, in mid-March, right before the economy began to lock down. The high point for the index was 164.72 in February 1985, to give you a point of reference, which is an independent indication that the US dollar has been in a long and steady decline for decades. Now, basically, the drop in the index's 3-year high at 103 at the beginning of the lockdowns to about 96.7 is part of the reason why the stock market has risen. At least that is the thrust of the MarketWatch article anyway. And you know what? I agree and disagree at the same time. The US dollar isn't necessarily represented by this index. The index really represents a statistical measure similar to other measures. I'll link you to the page showing their methodology for how they calculated it, which is relatively sound. But again, it is a statistical measure. The dollar is used and traded in the real world. So in that sense, I disregard that drop in the index as having anything to do with the rise in the stock market in general. Another point to bolster that argument is that the index was at a high right before it fell due to the pandemic. That includes the last 6 weeks or so, where the market had a massive recovery. So in other words, the timelines don't match up. Now I will say that the Federal Reserve dropping interest rates and other benchmark numbers to help keep the economy going probably is one of the larger reasons for the market's run-up in recent weeks. A lot of people believe that this is the beginning of the run-up to hyperinflation. But is it? I'm thinking probably not. You see, I'm starting to agree more and more with the view that the stimulus and quantitative easing injected into the economy is replacing currency chasing goods and services that already existed, instead of adding more money into the system at the same levels. No, I'm not saying that I don't think inflation will be on the way. I do think major inflation is coming soon, but I don't think it has anything to do with any index per se, and it has more to do with all the money and stimulus injected into the economy by both Congress and the Federal Reserve. That said, the one good thing being injected into this economy is great content, delivered piping hot, courtesy of BTP Fusion. Be a dear and smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And also hit that subscribe and notification bell as well, as it definitely helps the channel reach more and more viewers. While you're at it, do you have a better understanding of inflation/deflation? Do you think that the actions of the Federal Reserve helped to contribute to the rise of the stock market following the Corona crash? These are tough topics to consider, so leave us your thoughts. We're dying to know. And remember, a goal without a plan is a wish. A goal with a plan and no action is a wish list. Be sure to take action on your goals using the power of technology, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.